Right. It's 1 p.m. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Everyone is on mute mode. We will be using the chat feature, and I already see everyone putting in their destinations from Bali to Toronto, LA, Denton, Texas. Well, welcome everyone. I am Ezra Calvert with Entrada Insights. We have Chris Adams as our guest today. He is the Director of Research and Online Marketing at Miles Partnership. He's very well respected in the industry. He has done an excellent job by bridging data with tourism marketing. He has worked in the US, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. Chris is joining us today from Colorado. Chris, thank you for being with us today. We are very thankful for the wonderful research you and Miles Partnership have put together. They have been very insightful during the time of the pandemic and the crisis mode that the industry is right now. We are very excited about the wonderful slide deck that you have put together. Everyone get ready because Chris really put a rich bundle of information for all of us today here with the TTRA online forum. Chris, again, thank you for being here with us. The mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Ezra, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I should give recognition to our research partners. So Miles itself does not undertake research, but we put an enormous amount of money, time and effort into supporting research and soliciting and commissioning research from a variety of leading research companies, and I'll be highlighting and showcasing a number of them today. So my mission, and I chose to accept it, was to tell the story of the impact of COVID-19 in 7 graphs, and then to outline what I'm calling a sort of essential recovery toolkit. How can we grapple with this? How can we tackle it, mitigate, and move forward? And frankly, at the moment, in the US, and this is true in other parts of the world as well, we've got a lot of work to do. And tourism has never seen an impact like we're seeing with COVID-19, though pandemics themselves are not unusual in human history. Anybody who has a look back over history can see that. So obviously being more resilient and able to recover and learning for the next event, whatever that is going to be critical out of this. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you've got any questions or issues. And I've asked Ezra to jump in as we go through this and either highlight questions or points he wants to make, or to highlight questions you might be posing. So please share those. So it's been called the Great Travel Depression. So US travel has sort of framed this as not a recession, though the wider economy in the US and many other countries is in recession, but this is already a great travel depression, i.e., a very profound and impactful event. And you've probably seen the statistics, almost 4 out of 10 of all the workers that lost their jobs in the US, the millions and millions, are specifically related to travel, tourism and hospitality. So the impact on our industry has been profound in terms of recovery and employment. Recovery only starts with travel and tourism and hospitality. And I think that's a fundamental message we've got to be communicating, that as we move forward, telling the story like I'm going to attempt to do today, and empowering ourselves and everybody else in our industry to connect with stakeholders, whether it be in state or city, councils, governments, key leaders who can affect critical things that we need, such as funding for DMOs, destination marketing organizations, is going to be fundamental. If we're going to get out of this travel depression and the wider recession and tackle unemployment, it has to start with travel and tourism. Okay, so today we're going to go through the 7 data points. And we've actually done a little survey, so thank you very much to everybody who completed the survey, and Ezra's going to help summarize the results. So in a couple of key spots, we've asked you guys to chime in, and we'll compare that to what American travelers in general are saying. And then we'll have a look at these 8 essential steps for the recovery of tourism. And I've tried to bring in case study examples from around the world. Before we jump into this, I just want to highlight a major study that we're undertaking with Civitas, John Lambeth and the team at Civitas Advisors, Adam Sachs and the team at Tourism Economics, and Miles Partnership. We're all donating a considerable amount of time and effort into a pretty intensive look at the future of DMO funding. So there's a number of components to this. I need to recognize US Travel for their support, and Destinations International is also providing facilitation and access to all the resources that they've put together. But in principle, the time and effort's being donated. The report's going to be free. It's our collective way of trying to move the discussion forward about not only how can we tackle some of the short-term funding challenges that DMOs have, but how can we come out of this with a better future, a more resilient, sustainable funding framework for DMOs. So we're going to be updating the research that Civitas did with US Travel 2 years ago on 100 cities. We're looking at all 50 states. We're actually working with the Destination Marketing Association of Canada and Destination Canada, and bringing in Canadian destinations. We're working with a European partner, the Now Group, who works with European cities marketing. So we're going to be bringing some of the perspectives from Europe. We're doing a survey of all 50 states, 100 cities, plus Canadian destinations. And we'll be issuing the report in 2 parts, a discussion document for sort of feedback by Destinations International Conference in mid-July, July 14th, 15th, and then the sort of public report, and this I need to emphasize is sort of phase 1, but that will be ready for ESTO. And obviously there's some doubt about if ESTO is going to be going ahead in person or perhaps more likely as a virtual event, but we hope to have the final report and present it at or around ESTO in August. Okay, and please don't hesitate to reach out with insights, suggestions, or to connect on that funding project. And thanks again to John Lambeth and the team at Civitas and Adam Sachs at Tourism Economics. Okay, let's have a look at the story of the impact of COVID-19 in 7 data points. So on our Clarity in a Time of Crisis education portal, you'll see that we've got a number of component parts. We update all our webinars, and we curate not only the webinars we put on, but webinars from around the web, US Travel, Destinations International, TTRA, and others. And we actually have in one place all of the recordings of all of the webinars, not just our webinars, everybody's webinars. And then we've got a whole data tracking section. We've got insights, resources, expert sources of information. But in the data tracking, you will see basically the summary that I'm going to go through today. We just updated it. We update it every couple of weeks, 7 data points that tell the story of COVID-19. So you can go there for essentially a summary of what I'm going to run through right now. And what we try to do is curate 7 data points from our research partners that are most impactful and insightful. And I'm going to recognize and thank Destination Analyst, Longwoods, and UberMedia, Arrivalist, Focusrite, and others. So we've curated a range of research and data from the best in the industry. Special thanks to Longwoods. We've been working with them on a weekly research summary, a sentiment study update, and I'll be including some of theirs. So you can go there. What I'm going to dive into is these 7 data points, starting now. And I should say, of course, there's a whole sort of curated summary, including all the text and sort of summary. I'm not going to bore you with that in terms of as we run through it on the slide presentation, but that is all available up on that website. Okay, data point 1. Health is the primary driver of this recovery, and we've seen this throughout this pandemic that despite what we may want in terms of the travel and tourism industry or the broader economy, the trajectory of the recovery is fundamentally driven by health statistics and the outlook for how this pandemic is going to track. And there's a variety of ways to look at it. We've looked at it through UberMedia. For example, you can see here they've got on their COVID-19 summary these exceptional slides which look at foot traffic in specific cities mirrored against the trajectory of COVID-19 case numbers. And you can basically see an inverse relationship. So this is Milan and Florence in the north of Italy, of course, one of the first places outside China to see an explosion in the pandemic. And you can see starting in mid to late February, COVID-19 cases started to climb. Foot traffic numbers, i.e. locals and visitors out and about in Milan and Florence, started to crash. And we're just now starting to see a small recovery. And you can see, there's been a trending downwards of the COVID-19 cases. So underlying all of this, we can talk about confidence, which we will. We can talk about hygiene, public safety, social distancing, etc., etc. But underlying it all is the critical importance of grappling with the pandemic and mitigating and minimizing COVID-19 cases. So it is a public health crisis, and the public health crisis informs and drives everything about this wider crisis in travel and tourism. Data point number 2, we are seeing some green shoots, and we're seeing a recovery in travel and tourism, and that is fundamentally starting with road trips. So we go back to early May and acknowledgement of arrivalists. They've got their daily travel index, which is a summation of road trips of various types, 50 miles, 50 to 200 miles, and 200 miles and more. They've got all data for all 50 states. And you can see we've seen a recovery from sort of, late April into May, and that recovery is gaining traction. You can see on the left, this is the summation of the total road trip data for recent weeks. You can see Memorial Weekend, there was a spike back towards levels we saw in February. But of course, historically, Memorial Weekend would be 2, 3, 4, 5 times larger than typically what a weekend in February would be. So yes, a recovery, but a cautious, slow recovery. But there's no doubt from a variety of research that a lot of people are looking at road trips as a sort of fundamental part of how they're going to sort of start building confidence, getting out and about. And so road trips of all types, and particularly road trips to see friends and relatives, are going to be a fundamental part of how people are going to start traveling again. So monitoring and measuring road trips in your destinations is going to be critically important. Data point 3. We're seeing a recovery, but it is cautious and uneven, and that is built on a considerable amount of confusion and concern. So this is expressed in a variety of research, including destination analysts here. They're doing exceptional work with their weekly coronavirus update of how Americans are thinking and how they're behaving coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. And you can see a significant proportion of people are very much sort of in that stage of either needing more time before they can start traveling. So basically around 47% of people are saying they need a little bit more time before they can confidently start traveling. Around 30% saying I'm ready, but I do feel some hesitation. And only, 20, 22% are actually confidently either traveling or planning to travel. So we've got a lot of work to do on confidence, and there's many parts of that. And I'll be talking about that in the 8 essential recovery steps we need to take. Data point 4, another look at confidence, and we can look at it in multiple ways. So we actually surveyed you, and I'll ask Ezra to jump in at the end after we go through these and look at how Americans are feeling to see how TTRA members. So first of all, fundamentally, travel and tourism is built on a welcome. People have to feel comfortable traveling to a place, and that is fundamentally shaped by, do locals want travelers in their community? And there's already been, over recent weeks, some considerable news and discussion, certainly in rural communities, for example, about, is it safe to be opening up communities to visitors from cities or hotspots, et cetera, et cetera. And so how we manage that and message that and working with the local community to make sure they feel comfortable is a fundamental responsibility for destination marketing organizations and their partners. So you can see here, around 46% of Americans agree or strongly agree that I support opening up my community to visitors. 24%, still a significant minority, do not agree with opening up their community, and 30-odd% not sure. So we've got to see this tipping over the 50% mark and growing before we can confidently, I think, move forward in terms of growing travel and tourism. Getting these numbers, 24 and 31%, down significantly and moving up to a significant majority of people feeling comfortable saying, I'm opening up. And that, as I mentioned, is built around the health crisis, the trajectory of the pandemic in that community, and also the actions, safeguards, and guidelines that are being instituted to build that confidence. We also ask Americans with Longwoods about, do they feel safe themselves going out in the local community? And if the recovery is going to start locally, i.e. with locals feeling comfortable, travelers coming in, locals also have to feel safe themselves getting out. And currently 44% of people are saying yes, they agree or strongly agree. We've got to again see these numbers grow. On the positive side, they have grown from around a third to 35% over the last 2 to 3 weeks. But again, we need the significant majority of Americans to be feeling confident getting out into their local restaurants and shopping before we can confidently move forward. And these numbers, which collectively form the majority of Americans to date, decreasing substantially to small minorities. And then finally, we ask about the Americans themselves traveling outside, and a similar level, 44%. And again, a similar level of people either feeling, no, I don't really feel safe at the moment traveling, or they're not sure. So in all of these areas, confidence is critical. It's a multifaceted response. Let's find out, what did TTRA members say? Ezra.
Thank you for everyone for responding to this quick poll that we sent out yesterday. We just pulled it out right before this forum. And here's what you have said to the answers. In regards to supporting opening up the community, most people were around 68% in agreement, whether it's strongly agree or agree opening up community to visitors. And it's higher than an average traveler said. Chris and I were discussing this right before the call. This is really not surprising, because as travel professionals, you are looking at data and what's happening in communities very closely. And most travel professionals are active travelers. And I think that's what we're gonna see in overall travelers' perspective as well. When we look at the average versus those loyal travelers, there is gonna be a behavior differentiation. And those enthusiastic travelers, and this takes us to the next perspective, feeling safe traveling outside the community. That difference was about 10%. 54% is what you have said, and American travelers responded to this at 44%. But it goes back to that point, the travel enthusiasts, the loyal travelers, they are going to be open to travel. The pandemic was not a market condition, it is a health and safety concern. So as long as the regulations and confidence gains back, I'm really optimistic about this number. I think it's going to start climbing up, and some destinations are already climbing up. And Chris really said it so eloquently and so well. Recovery is going to start at home, and still going back to that confidence and safety and health. Average American is at 44%, and what you have said is 55% overall in agreement with being open and feeling safe about dining out and shopping in communities. Another thing that I want to reiterate here is, if you look at the columns, and at the very right of each column section, you are going to see those small percentages who are in strong disagreement. Opening up community to my visitors, that was 3%. Feeling safe outside the community, that was 6%. And shopping and dining inside in the community, that was 5%. I think those are really encouraging numbers, whether it's travel professionals responding to the survey or average travelers. That's a really, really encouraging number. It's just outliers, and I think as we gain confidence and safety and businesses start opening up, things are going to start climbing up. So these results were very encouraging, but you are definitely more optimistic than average traveler, and I really anticipate the same pattern for loyal and enthusiastic travelers. Chris?
Very good, thank you. And so obviously being voices in the debate in your own community and travel industry and informing it with information and data is critical. Data point number 5. We ask, as part of our weekly research study with Longwoods, Longwoods COVID-19 US travel sentiment study, which is been updated weekly, though we are moving to every couple of weeks now. We ask about what type of experience are they going to seek out over the summer? What's going to be important to their holiday? And what we found out is dining and shopping. To that point we just discussed. People miss going out and eating out and shopping, and then a wide variety of other outdoor experiences with recreation and relaxation by water, whether it be ocean, lake, or rivers, you can see as predominant, but also visiting state and national parks, outdoor activities of various types, hiking, cycling, etc., all very important. Those significant minorities of people do still want to go to theme parks, museums, art galleries, and other places. So obviously ensuring that those are safe and have got guidelines, safety protocols in place is going to be key. Data point number 6. The excitement is with younger travelers, with the pandemic disproportionately impacting older citizens, older Americans. It's not surprising that millennials and Gen Z are more confident and more excited. So what we have seen very positively, and acknowledgement again to Destination Analysts, this is from their coronavirus traveler sentiment. When they asked this question about 3-4 weeks ago, baby boomers were much more muted in their excitement, and we saw a pretty significant uptick and frankly a narrowing of that gap between baby boomers and excitement amount with millennials. So obviously, if you're a destination that is targeting older Americans, you're going to have to work a little bit harder. These issues around health, safety, protocols, standards, etc., are going to be more important. Over-informing baby boomers in terms of what you're doing to build that confidence. And frankly, communicating responsible, clear messaging around maybe who shouldn't be traveling, perhaps particularly older people and people with underlying chronic conditions that make them extremely vulnerable to the impacts of COVID-19. Conversely, there's opportunities with millennials and younger travelers in terms of building that excitement. And the final data point, we asked specifically about, their cautious first steps. So 40% of Americans are not planning to take any travel in the coming 6 weeks. So we've actually asked this now with Longwoods a couple of times. No significant change over the last sort of couple of weeks. So 40% are not planning to travel. We've got to try and decrease that number. And those that are traveling, we've talked about visiting friends and relatives primarily by car, but small, but it is one area where we did see some growth. People are prepared to get on planes to go and see friends and relatives. So again, this comes back to the recovery starting locally. We've got to activate our local communities, and we've got to engage and activate visiting friends and relative travel with our locals, getting them to come, stay longer, spend more money, and ideally, of course, look at commercial accommodation. And we already know from research that 30 to 40% of VFR travelers do not stay with friends and relatives, even though visiting friends and relatives is an important part. So it can drive opportunities with commercial accommodation. Also, Airbnb has noticed a significant uptick in their bookings, and I think they've reported in some destinations record booking numbers. So if you're a destination that really hasn't engaged with the vacation rental sector, and I know there's all sorts of concerns and issues and even tensions with that space, it's clear coming out of this crisis that vacation rentals are going to be an important part of accommodation. So having an active role in that space is arguably going to be important as well. Okay, so growing that, decreasing rather, that 40% of people who are not planning to travel and taking advantage of the collective 40% of people who are planning to travel for VFR reasons is also critical. So, we also asked you a second question, making a prediction on how quickly tourism is going to recover in your destination. And drum roll, please. Results are, Ezra.
Your responses to this question was in terms of what percentage of leisure travelers will return in your destination. It averaged out being at 50%. But I want to really point out the 58% here said 50 to 75%. To me, that's really, really encouraging, and that shows how Chris said this at the very beginning, how tourism could be one of the first industries to recover, and it starts at home. Tourism is about being welcome. That positive sign is there. Recovery is going to be very regional. But overall, 60% of you said 50 to 75% of travelers to your destination will return. There was about 7% who said it will be less than 25%. It's very possible, especially at regional level. We are hearing these discussions in some cities in the near term and some urban areas. So we are going to see definitely that mix of how the product and of the current situation with social distancing and the coronavirus situation is going to evolve. But this was a very encouraging result.
So I myself was one of the 28% who indicated 25 to 50%, and that's simply based on the research and data to date. I want to be more optimistic. We have to be optimistic, but frankly, if you look at where US travelers are in terms of their confidence level, their outlook, what they're saying about their level of willingness to get out and about in their local community, let alone start traveling, we've got a significant uptick to address if we're going to get to the 50 to 75%. Yeah. And in terms of observed travel behavior, whether it be road trips, the arrivalist data, or airline data, is still indicating we're at only maybe 30, 40% of normal levels. And that's in some of the stronger performing destinations. So we've got to step up and improve. And that's what the next section's about. What are the 8 essential steps for recovery? So those were our 7 data points that sort of tell the story of where we are. If we're going to move forward and get to 50 to 75% of normal in the next 6 months, what is this going to look like? Okay, so let's jump into what I've called 8 essential steps for recovery. So COVID-19 is still being communicated in most parts of the world. Every one of the 200, almost everyone, I think there's a handful of countries, including one of our clients, Samoa. Samoa hasn't had any cases. There's a small number of other places, no cases. There's some places like New Zealand, my home country, that's done a remarkable job in basically eradicating COVID-19, and that has seen, a very considerable sort of impact on the recovery of tourism. Some quite strong numbers in terms of domestic, though they're obviously hugely impacted by the loss of international and the closure of borders. They have launched, for example, a big domestic campaign, and we're seeing that around the world, obviously a pivot from all sorts of DMOs to domestic and stimulating domestic travel. But that, obviously, how successful that's going to be is very much in the context of where the pandemic is at. And so some countries like China, for example, have actually seen some quite robust returns in key areas of domestic travellers, but they've got a very sort of national, exhaustive and detailed approach to managing at every point in the trip planning experience the safety and health of travellers and building that confidence that the risk of transmission is going to be low. We're seeing a somewhat more uneven recovery in Europe, though they have issued this sort of Europe-wide Marshall Plan for the recovery of tourism, and they're certainly investing across the country, across the continent rather, to try and bring back a critical part of their economy in a more coordinated way. And I suppose that coordinated national approach is the largest piece of the puzzle that we do not have here in the US, sort of the fragmented state, city and county response, I think, is holding back the recovery of travel and tourism. So let's dive into those eight essential steps. I think it starts with obviously mitigating and managing the health crisis in an aggressive and assertive way. And so if you have a look at the trajectory of COVID-19 in the United States, we are seeing the curve has been flattened. Case numbers are in slow decline, but we're not seeing the precipitous drop that we need to really build confidence. So case numbers are still in the sort of 13,000 or more daily. And globally, we're looking at over 100,000 new cases, and in fact, reaching record levels globally. But even here in the United States, there's been growth of case numbers in over 100 counties across the United States, even as other counties and cities, notably New York, are seeing very, very dramatic drops. So we need this approach to obviously health standards around social distancing, mask wearing, cleaning standards, etc. We need rigorous, far more rigorous, I think, tracking and tracing. And we need, obviously, testing to be ramped up considerably so we can really get on top of this health crisis in a very assertive and aggressive way. And so that needs to be part about what the travel and tourism industry is saying is, look, until we deal with the health crisis, whatever we do is going to be significantly impacted by obviously the overarching health concerns and the trajectory of the pandemic. Number two, there are some things we can do, and there's been some incredible work in this space in terms of health and safety guidelines, cleaning protocols, and cancellation policies. But again, I would argue we need greater national action and coordination. So we have clarity and consistency, whether it be with cleaning and hygiene standards, the application of mask wearing standards, for example, social distancing standards, are all important in terms of how we can really build confidence around the travel experience. Because we just had Sandals Resorts on one of our recent webinars, and they're doing some extraordinary work across their resorts. But of course, if I'm going to go to a Sandals resort, I have to get on a plane. I might have to travel through multiple airports. I've got to get to that airport and get from that airport. So we've got all these touch points in the travel experience that need to be part of this framework of clarity and consistency in terms of how we're dealing with hygiene and safety. Singapore really led the world in terms of introducing a national approach to cleanliness, hygiene and safety standards. Their SG Clean is implemented across all of their hotels. And it also includes obviously strong messaging to guests and visitors. So that sort of coordinated national approach, at least in terms of trying to bring together the existing standards and create an overarching message of how the travel experience can be made safe is critical. And that really flows into essential step number 3, which is having clear, consistent information. Doubt, confusion, and concern is the enemy of recovery. And at the moment, we have a lot of doubt and confusion. And so destinations need to work strenuously to make sure that they are providing clarity in what can be an enormously confusing area. So, for example, if I go to the CDC website and I have a look at their travel advice, the first thing they say is research what's happening to case numbers in the destination that you're planning to go to. And then they send you off to this rather complex site that's got all sorts of numbers about, case numbers and what's happening to recent case numbers rather than clarity and consistency. So I think destinations certainly need to be absolutely clear around what are the guidelines that are in place in their community, what's open, what's not, as well as reinforcing information about responsibility. But as far as case numbers goes, if I visit a map like this and I start drilling into specific counties, which could, of course, case numbers could vary radically between different places, I'm not really getting a clear and consistent message. I would argue, and I know the Europeans are looking at this, Singapore has this in place, we need a far stronger travel advisory system where people, and this could vary, of course, depending on the type of traveler you are. So the advice to a young, fit, healthy person could be fundamentally different to someone who's 80 and has underlying health conditions. A clear advice around, is it safe to travel? I think in the absence of that, that confusion and concern will persist. Essential step number 4. Obviously, we've got all of these steps in place to date. So we've tackled the health crisis. We're introducing clearer and more consistent industry standards around cleaning, safety, social distancing, etc. We're communicating more clearly about what the risk is. That provides an environment in which we can focus then more on building confidence. And obviously, confidence is what inspires travel. Travel is a discretionary item. I'm not likely to travel unless I've got essential travel if I'm not feeling confident. And so that starts obviously at a individual business level, such as Sandals Resort here, but it can spread out nationally. And so we've seen a lot of this sort of communication in China, for example, in terms of re-energizing and reactivating their domestic market. Communicating very clearly that at every point in the travel experience, you're going to find businesses, staff, etc., who are incredibly mindful about keeping their guests safe. Okay, we've talked about the critical importance of locals and local recovery. There's multiple parts to that, including all the steps we've already covered to date. But certainly engaging and activating your local market is fundamental. And a lot of DMOs have not traditionally targeted locals, but both in this crisis and long term, I think there's a powerful argument to be made for having a far more engaged connection with locals, both in terms of getting them out and about in local communities, shopping and dining. So you saw only 44% of people are feeling confident doing that at the moment. We need those numbers to be much, much, much higher. And locals are going to be the primary basis of recovery and supporting those businesses who are in desperate need. But we want a long-term connection with locals. before this crisis, we had all sorts of concerns and doubts about the growth of tourism, and is tourism really creating benefits in my community? And so obviously by having a far more engaged connection with our local community, we can understand those concerns, communicate much more clearly around what we're trying to do in terms of growing tourism in a sustainable way and ensuring that they are part of the support for tourism. And we're going to need that support coming out of this crisis more than ever. So, Kat, have you got a
Chris,
question?
should I go ahead and plug in a question? We got
Sure.
two good questions, and it will really blend in before we talk about what Destination Canada is doing. First, I'm going to move into Lizelle's question. It's a really big question, but good one. Hello, thank you for this presentation. My name is Lizelle Milazzo, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I was surprised to hear such optimism in the data and was curious about the ways that social and cultural privilege are impacting these responses. I was hoping you could speak on the responsibilities that tourism academics have in terms of social equity amongst travelers who are usually wealthier and from more urban developed areas and their host communities. This feels particularly pronounced living in the United States right now, where the low wage earners in the hospitality and service industries are more likely to be African American and other minorities who are being hit hardest by the coronavirus. Anything that we can bring in here, Chris, especially thinking about equity, sustainability, sociocultural influence in a community. I don't want it to be political, but I think from a just human perspective, there could be some good takeaways.
Yeah. Well, I think we're living in a transformational period, and we haven't really seen, I think, this sort of degree of disruption and transformation since the Great Depression, which led to dramatic changes in the political, social landscape, and I think a far more equitable distribution of wealth. So, I mean, one of the challenges in this, whether it be tourism growth or whether it be other parts of growth, we've got to provide a more compelling response to how can you ensure the benefits of tourism or benefits of other economic activity are spread much more widely. And frankly, to date, we failed, and large parts of communities were left behind. So whether you're on the right side of the political spectrum or on the left, this is going to be an unprecedented period of change. And I think travel and tourism specifically, we've seen dramatic impacts on people who work on travel and tourism. But if you look at the data, and with Longwoods, we've been asking weekly about people's confidence in terms of traveling. We haven't really seen amongst US travelers any impact to date on economic concerns. And that's partly because COVID-19 is so large, but also partly because, frankly, for a long period of time, US travelers were disproportionately wealthier and more affluent. And a lot of the people who work in our industry did not have the financial wherewithal really to afford healthcare, let alone to go and travel. So we've got to tackle these key issues, I think, as a society and as an industry as we come out of this. Travel and tourism, traveling should be a right and an opportunity for everybody, not a privilege just for the wealthy. Okay, and let's finish up this and we can dive into any other questions people have got. So visiting friends and relatives, and drive travel. So we've heard the importance of VFR. Again, this goes back to the importance of activating locals. They're going to in turn activate their friends and relatives to come and visit. And inspiring shorter haul drive markets are going to be critical in terms of inspiring the recovery. So having clear, strong, compelling calls to action are key in this market. Lots of destinations have invested in this, but a surprising number really haven't had the sort of strong calls to action and deals that arguably they should. So whether you're Chattanooga or another destination, having specific calls to action and specific ways in which locals can take advantage of travel and tourism experiences. Because I think, frankly, that was one of the challenges. I know this was a big issue in New Zealand traditionally, It's been a big issue in Hawaii where they have special local rates. A lot of locals feel that some attractions and activities are not affordable for them. And so coming out of this, if we want locals and their friends and relatives visiting, having smart, thoughtful pricing policies that reflect that local, loyal audience, I think is going to be key. And so working with your industry on specific activation strategies is going to be important. We're on the home straight here. Central step number 7, we need, obviously, if we're going to have a welcoming community, they need to feel that visitors are traveling safely and responsibly. And so it's critical to have messaging around that attracts visitors who are going to act responsibly. Otherwise, we're going to get a significant backlash from locals that we do not want to deal with. So Colorado's been involved for some time in terms of communicating responsible travel messaging. Leave No Trace, they've partnered with an organization around messaging on how to act appropriately in the backcountry and in natural areas, and they've now adapted this messaging for COVID-19 to communicate very strongly. If you're going to come to Colorado, here's smart, thoughtful, responsible, respectful things you should be doing in your travel. So that's going to be critically important. And we saw the importance of water-based activities, beaches, lakes, rivers, etc. It's only going to take one incident at a beach in your community, for example, where people are not social distancing. There's large numbers of people coming together, whether they be locals or visitors, to really create significant concern and potentially put us all back in terms of the recovery. And the final one, obviously we're researchers, we're data analysts, we need a measurement framework, and a measurement framework that provides continuous feedback so we can refine and adapt what we're doing based on conditions. And again, I think this is an area where the United States is behind the curve. So Canada, for example, has been doing some remarkable work at a national level in terms of coming up with what they call a recovery signal framework. They've got 6 major streams of work in a variety of areas of research. The recovery signals is just one of them. And they're all providing a much more robust framework for understanding what's happening in terms of the recovery, what are locals feeling, what are visitors feeling, what's happening at an industry level, et cetera, in a way that we do not have here in the United States, which is much more fragmented and disjointed, which is remarkable for an industry that is over $1 trillion and represents 38% of all the unemployment that's been driven out of this. Okay, so there's my 8 essential steps to recovery. I think if we tackle and invest time and energy in each of these areas, and ideally with some sort of state and national coordination in the US, and if you're somewhere else in the world, typically that's going to be easier and further ahead, but that sort of coordination is going to be critical to tackling each and every one of these areas that drive recovery. Thank you very much, Ezra. Any other questions?
Yeah, this was excellent, Chris, and I love your perspective from clarity to confidence to measurement, and that perspective. I totally agree. I think Canada has done such a great job. What we can see, especially from our parts of the country. I love the fact that they're trying to connect residents, business, industry, travelers, and try to make the puzzle more clear and build a more clear road path for the industry. That was an excellent example. So thank you for that. Kim had a really good point, and it goes back to media. So I'm going to bring her question, Kim Williams. This is from Kim Williams. This morning, I saw a story that Brazil followed the US's response to COVID, and they're now reporting high cases and deaths. How will this negative story reporting impact international travelers' travel confidence in the US COVID protocols from the federal government?
Yeah, I mean, every country in the world has been touched by this COVID-19. Every country in the world is essentially being judged on its response, and that is going to have impacts on all sorts of areas in terms of how you're perceived as a place to travel, a place to do business with, a place to invest in, a place to send your kids to study, etc., etc. So I think, frankly, Brazil's been found wanting. And, that's not a political statement, that's a health statement if you have a look at what's happening. And this pandemic has a long way to run, subject to, some sort of vaccine or breakthrough in terms of therapeutics not being possible. And so countries like Brazil, and this also applies to some extent to other parts of the world, and even here in the United States, lifting the game in terms of how you respond in a responsible way and balancing the health concerns with the economic concerns. It's tricky, but I think Brazil to date hasn't done a great job.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing borders open up. Of course, Asia is head of the curve. Europe is opening up as we speak this month and July. I think those are really positive signs. And I really think from a destination perspective, those media relations will be super important because media wants to be part of that positive messaging from a recovery perspective. So we really need to get those positive messaging, what Chris especially said, clear, concise information and building confidence.
Yeah, so Iceland, we've got Inga, who was head of Visit Iceland until a couple of months ago. She's on our June 23rd webinar, along actually with John Lambeth from Civitas, who's going to talk about that DMO funding project. But Inga's going to talk about Iceland's opening up. So they're down to 0 cases as well. They're focused on pivoting to domestic. They're taking a more ambitious approach compared to the likes of New Zealand or Australia or most other countries in terms of reopening international in the coming even weeks or month or two. So I think they're going to be an instructive example of can you do that safely and what are the protocols you need to put in place.
Yeah, and Kim had another follow-up question, Chris. In your opinion, Chris, can local destinations' response outweigh the US response? Will travelers weigh one more than the other?
Well, it's such a saturated media landscape that unfortunately, the voice of an individual destination is often sort of submerged by the sort of national media chatter. But that's, I think most confidently you can connect with your locals, and that should be one market that you should be able to get cut through and clarity around rebuilding. So if I was measuring success in terms of addressing that challenge, I'd be looking to, am I reaching and engaging and informing my locals and getting them out and about? So, if you don't have research in place in terms of how locals are feeling about getting out and about in your own community, what they're doing, if you don't have a clear, compelling way to reach locals, like a significant email database, social media connections, localized advertising plan, etc. You absolutely, that needs to be job number one, because it's going to be critically important in terms of the recovery. And I've already talked about, I think, the long-term benefits.
So I'm just going to raise a perspective that you brought in from a sustainability perspective, how we need to look at destinations from a more holistic way. That example about Colorado was just beautiful, care for Colorado. Tony also mentioned that about in the chat feature. Colorado was also very strong in their messaging with their decision makers in the last month, defending their budgets. And personally, I thought that was so strong, so well positioned, defending the industry. And you have also mentioned about what you are doing in partnerships with other research vendors, looking at funding. Anything that we should re-emphasize or put in front of our participants here today? Sustainable funding, sustainable finance, those are the things that have to be in front of everyone's agenda. The pandemic brought it back at a more needed perspective to all of us. Anything else you have on that, Chris? Because I think that's so valuable to
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah. So I would really highlight the critical importance of looking at your role and mission. So we've already seen for many years a shift towards a broader destination management focus, and the likes of Colorado Tourism Office and the extraordinary work of Kathy Ritter. And full disclaimer, they're a client of ours. But you know, apart from that, we've always recognized the importance of the work that places like Colorado are doing, that like Oregon. And I think Colorado would highlight Oregon as a real US leader and pioneer, and really an active, assertive role in destination management through their rural tourism studios, and a long-term commitment to building capacity, capability, and focusing on broader sustainable outcomes. So I think that sort of shift, and using this opportunity to look at your role, your the types of skills and capabilities, programs you're running, so you come out of this crisis with a broader set of roles and responsibilities. I think that's going to be fundamental to rebuilding DMO funding and ensuring that you've got a more respected, powerful seat at the table, moving forward into the growth phase, and then dealing with future challenges. I think this narrow focus on marketing, as Silo does, we haven't frankly built a strong set of sort of partnerships and support, both at a government level and even frankly within our own industry. So we're going to redouble our efforts, I think, in terms of that.
So I think I'm going to move to my last question. With that changing paradigm, looking at tourism from a bigger perspective, we are all going to wear bigger hats than ever. What are some of the metrics or KPIs that you see in the near future that destinations, researchers should put in front of their eyes?
So I'd answer that in two ways. So one, we need measurement around recovery. So critically important, clear, decisive measurement around the key areas of the recovery that we've discussed today. So what's happening with locals in terms of their perceptions and activity, what's happening in our key VFR and drive markets, for example, what's happening with our business community, and what's happening in terms of how many are reopening, how many people have they laid off, how many people are being rehired. Those sort of critical recovery metrics is key. And then longer term, to the point I was making before about this new, more broad and inclusive role in destination management as well as marketing. I think having clearer measurements around what success looks like in terms of a sustainable, broad-based tourism is going to be key. And I think central to that is having a better understanding of what quality tourism looks like, not just quantity. So many of our measurements are frankly focused around very simplistic quantity-based metrics, visitor spend, for example, visitor numbers, nights, etc. And yet the impact and benefits of different types of visitors is fundamentally and profoundly different. And we've got to, as DMOs, be able to measure and report on that far more accurately.
I love that, Chris. The fact that you mentioned about quality versus quantity. I think the future is going to be blending those two together, and especially from a quality perspective, there are so many intangibles. As an industry, we have to figure out how to measure them in a meaningful and smart and fast and speed way possible. This pandemic definitely taught us that data is becoming stale very fast, and we need high, fast, frequent data and really enrich our perspectives. We love what you have done as an ad agency, bringing all these data sources together, sponsoring all this breadth of knowledge, insights, and putting it in front of all stakeholders, and especially being with us here today. Chris, really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for your time. We wish you a wonderful week. We are going to be back on Friday with another quick session. Wendy is going to be our guest for Friday. That will be a wrap-up session. So please make sure to retune to that one as well. Thank you, and stay well, safe, and be kind. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.